Okay, great. Looks like people are starting to trickle in, so we'll kick things off. Welcome to Monolith Mondays. My name is Megan. I'm the marketing manager here at Monolith Forensics. If you haven't been to Monolith Mondays before, what we do is every Monday at 10 a.m. Central Time, somebody from our team does a little demo of something inside Monolith. It's really just so you can learn a little bit about the platform, and give you a chance to ask our team questions directly if you have any. So for today's topic, we're going to be continuing part two of what we covered last week, which is the initial setup of Monolith to kind of get it prepared for tracking your data the way you want and get it kind of ready and set up for active casework. I'm going to go ahead and kick off my screen share here. While I'm doing that, we are going to have time for questions. So if you have questions at any time, just drop them in the chat or drop them in the Q&A and we'll get to those for you. Make sure I share the right thing here. All right. Okay, so right now we're looking at our docs page, but just a quick review. So what we covered last time was kind of the first half of this doc page, and what we're going to cover today is the second half. So if I go into this is our monolith that we were working in last week. And just to recap what we did in the last session, we set up our organization info. We added our team members. We set up item number formats for cases, evidence, and storage items. That's not the right tab, Megan. So we set up our item number formats. We also configured our case types. We set up case statuses in progress, and we also set up evidence types and evidence progress, and then a custom evidence field that will apply to our smartphone and tablet evidence types. And the last thing we did was create time entry categories. So our pretend team here is going to be using the task management system inside of Monolith. So we went ahead and set up a category so we can track that time within Monolith and kind of keep track of what we're all working on. So today we're going to be continuing with configuring a few more settings. And the first one we're going to set up is quality assurance items. So in Monolith, if you're not familiar, if we go into, let's go into our case here. In every case, there's this quality assurance tab. And what this lets you do is it lets you set up QA processes inside of Monolith. So you can add QA reviews directly into a case, and then you can kind of have your examiners follow that QA process you've laid out right inside of Monolith. So pretty handy to kind of like do all your stuff in the same platform. But before we can use this, there's a little bit of setup we have to do. So let's go back into our settings here. And the first thing we're going to add is a QA checklist item. I'm actually going to delete this pretend one. I meant to delete it earlier. Okay. So here we're going to add a new QA checklist. And I kind of think of a QA checklist as like the process as a whole. So I'm going to add a new QA checklist. Let's say we have a standard process we follow for collection review. So I'm just going to add a new checklist and name it collection review and click submit. So you notice that this is created and is showing as enabled, but something important I want to point out to you is there's not actually anything in here yet. So we actually have to take one more step to add checklist items into this checklist so that when we go add it to our case, there will actually be items in there to check off. It'll make more sense once we show an example after we build this. So as we continue, the first thing we're going to want to do is click on this view button here. And this is actually where we can add checklist groups and checklist items. So think of a checklist group as kind of like a subheading. So maybe there's, a couple of parts to your process, and each of those parts has a few steps. So that's kind of how the hierarchy works. So let's say I've got a group of steps that's specific for data in this collection review process. I'll create a checklist for that. Okay, so you can see I've got my checklist group. Now I'm going to add items to this group. So I'm going to click on this add item here. And I'm going to put review and verify data size. For the checklist items, we recommend being as descriptive as possible, because you want it to be really clear when somebody's going through this QA process, like exactly what steps they're supposed to follow. So be sure to be as descriptive as you can when you're setting this up. All right. And I actually have another step in this process that our team follows. So I'm also going to add an item for verify hash values. Okay, cool. And I actually have another checklist group that I'm going to create as well. So I also have a separate process that I want to QA review called process. And I'm going to add just one item here, verify error log with collections, and click submit. Okay, so I've got my collection review checklist set up. So let's go take a look at what it looks like now if we were to add a QA review to our example case. So I'll just quickly navigate back to cases into my Monolith Monday example case here. And now if we go into the quality assurance tab and click on new QA review, I'm just going to call this Monolith Monday and set a QA type. These are pre-populated, so I'll just mark this as general. And here now we can assign the checklist that we built. So I'll click this and I'll click collection review. I'll assign it to myself. And for the description, we'll just put my first QA review. Hooray! Okay, create QA review. Okay, and now if we click in here and take a look at this, here you'll see the groups we created as well as the individual items in those kind of subgroups. And then now that this is in here, once somebody goes to do this QA process, if everything looks good, they can just check this off. That'll timestamp it and mark who was reviewing this. And then we also have this QA create QA entry, and this is specifically for reporting violations. And this is another thing that we have a little bit of setup to do before that's ready to like actually be used. So let's go back into our settings here. And now we're going to go to QA issue types. Oh, sorry, I apparently didn't clear this out as much as I thought I did before the session, but that's okay. We will make them again. So QA issue types, what these are is this is just kind of categories for the types of violations that you may see as you're doing your QA process. So there's a little description here that explains it as well. So identify events that do not meet your QA standards. So some common types that we see are a straight up violation. And then maybe they skipped a process, so we'll add one for skipped process as well. Okay, so I've got a couple of types created now. So if I go back to my cases here, and if we return to our QA review, okay, let's say I noticed an issue with this particular checklist item and I need to create a QA entry against it. So now I can click QA entry, and I'll just quickly fill some of this out. Here is where we can select from those issues that we just created. So let's say that this particular person skipped the process. So I'll mark that as the issue type. And I'm going to mark that it's not resolved yet because I'm marking this as a violation. And here we can set the associated QA item. So here we can see it's going to list all of our items from our checklist. And we can click this so we know which part of the process this violation is reported on. And then there's some stuff there's a space to write details about the violation, resolution steps that need to be taken, and then any notes on this particular setup. But setup wise, these were the two things that we really needed to get in process before we can start using this actively in our casework. So I'll just click Create QA Entry. And now our QA stuff is set up and ready to go for active casework. Fantastic. So moving on down the list of our setup doc, the next thing we're going to do is create item locations. So over here in the evidence management section under the item locations tab, let me go ahead and click in here. So what item locations does is it kind of lets you create like a digital version of how you're storing evidence of reality so that you can then track it in Monolith. So this comes into play especially with chain of custody. So as items move through the chain of custody process, if you've created locations and location groups in Monolith, you can actually track, what evidence room is it stored in, what shelf is it on, and you can just follow where that item is throughout the chain of custody process. So by default, you'll probably see this one here that says team. So if I click on the chevron to open this up, these are just the users in my Monolith tenant. So anytime a user is added, they will be added to this team as a location. And the reason we do this is, if an examiner is working on a device at their workstation, this is just a way for us to keep track of, oh, okay, this device is checked out to this user at their workstation. But let's say we also have an evidence locker that we want to store evidence items in, or that we are storing evidence items in our lab rather. Well, what we can do is we can click Create Group, and we can set up an evidence locker. And now if we click on this chevron, here we have a button to create a location. So let's say our evidence locker has two shelves. We'll keep it really simple just for this example. Well, I can create a location for each of those shelves. So let me click on create location and we'll just call this shelf one. And let's say I also have another shelf, shelf two. And you can set up really as many groups and locations within groups as you want. Really, the idea is to make it match how you're actually storing evidence in reality, just because then all the tracking will be consistent between Monolith and how things are actually stored in your lab. So now that I have this set up, let's take a look at why this is important. So if I go into my evidence item here, okay, so this is an evidence item that I created last week. And if we scroll down in the overview section, here you can see that the current location is me. So this item is checked out to me, meaning it's at my workstation. And over here, you'll also see the full location path. So in the location path, the way it breaks down is first you'll see the office. So if you have multiple offices set up in Monolith, it's going to show you which office this is stored in. And then below that, you'll see the name of the item location group. So that's team right now. And then you'll see like the specific location. So let's move this and see what happens to those, that information after I move it to my new location that I just set up. So I'll just move this to shelf one. And click move. And now if we go back to the overview, you can see the current location and the location path have both been updated. So the reason we recommend setting this up at the onset is that way all of your chain of custody and your items are tracked how they are in reality in your lab. It's just an easy way to keep track of everything, and Monolith will just do it for you as you set that moving items through the chain of custody process. And this applies to evidence items and storage items as well. And if we go back to item locations now, if we open up our evidence locker, here you can see there's a device here. And you can actually click into it and see the list of devices stored at that location as well. All right, moving on down the list here. So the next thing we're going to do is, let's say our lab has a storage item that's used across multiple cases that we want to go ahead and set up inside of Monolith. So a storage item in Monolith is really just anything that's being used to store case or evidence related data. So this could be things like evidence images, acquisitions, photos. We have a really good Monolith Monday recording on storage items. If you go to our YouTube channel, highly recommend that if you're interested in learning more. But for our purposes here, I'm just going to set up, let's say we have a file share that our lab uses for multiple cases. I'm just going to go ahead and set that up now. So when I'm working in Monolith later, it's already here for me to like select from the data. So I'll just click add new storage. And I'm actually going to type in a storage number since this is a general storage item that will be used across several cases. I'm just going to call it file share. And then let's say that's the name of my server at my location. All right. Next, we can set this as a file share. I'm going to skip the serial number for now. And then let's say it's 10 terabytes. And the important thing to note in the advanced details here is this general storage drop down here. And we want this set to yes. So in Monolith, there's two types of storage. There's general storage, which is storage that can be used across multiple cases. And then there's assigned storage, which is specific to a particular case. So I'm going to leave this set to general storage because, again, that's what we're setting up right now. And I'll click create storage. All right, cool. Now I have my general storage item created. All right, we just have a couple more things here and then we'll open it up for Q&A. But the next thing we're going to do is add our forensic software. So if we go into the lab management section and click on forensic software here, you can see I've got one software in here, but let's say I also use X-Ways. We can add that here. And there's two reasons why we would recommend adding forensic software here. The first is that you can keep track of renewal dates and license costs. So that helps you a little bit with planning. You can turn on notifications so that Monolith will let you know when an expiration is coming up. So you're not caught off guard by a renewal. And you have all the numbers handy to kind of help with your budgeting. And the other thing it does is anything you add to this list, when you go to do an acquisition inside of Monolith on an evidence item, this list will populate in the software dropdown, so it'll save you a little bit of typing as well. And I'll show you how that works after we add a new software. So let's add a new software. Let's say I'm using Xways. I don't actually know what the vendor's name is. I'm just going to put Xways. We can enter in a license name. If we have the edition, we can enter in the edition. And then here we can set the purchase date, the expiration date. We'll just assume that it is 1 year in the future. And we can enter in the license costs. If there's a maintenance or support or subscription cost as well, you can enter that in this field here. And if we have a license key, we can enter that. And if our software is on a dongle, we can also enter the dongle serial number. And lastly, we can add a location. I'm just going to put this in our main office for now and leave the description blank. And then I'll click add software. Okay, so our software is added here. So now let's go take a look at an evidence item. And if we click into the acquisitions tab and click new acquisition, this software box here, this is what is being pulled from that forensic software. So again, it's going to save you a little bit of typing as you start to work in Monolith. So that's why we recommend setting this up kind of at the onset so it's ready to go as soon as you get to this step in your forensic workflow. Okay, I just have one more thing to go through and then we'll open it up for questions. So the last thing we're going to add is a custom inquiry field. So I'm going to go back to settings and go into my custom fields. So last week we added a custom evidence field, so that's fantastic. That's still in here. But we're also going to add a custom inquiry field. And the reason we're going to do this is because we can actually add these fields to the forensic intake form on the Relay side. If you're not familiar with Relay, that's our built-in forensic request portal. So let me click over to my Relay tab here. And what this lets you, what Relay lets you do is it lets your forensic partners submit requests to your team directly through a simple kind of guided form, this form here. And then all of that information when they submit a request goes into your monolith with everything that they have included. So the reason we want to set up these custom fields now is because if there's specific data we need to even begin working on the evidence item or the casework, we want that to be in this form the first time somebody submits it. So that's why we're going to go ahead and set up an custom inquiry field. And then I'll show you where that appears on the Relay side. So in the inquiry fields, I'm just going to go ahead and click create field. So let's say that my lab can't start cases unless I have a search warrant document uploaded or sent to me as part of the request. Well, I can actually add another guardrail and be like, okay, I want you to say that, hey, I have attached this document. So we can set up a simple yes, no checkbox, make it required. And it's just like another way to remind them to upload that document and let them know that you need that in order to start work. So I'm going to name this legal authority provided. And I'm going to make it required. We're just going to set up a really quick yes, no drop-down menu. There's another Monolith Monday that goes into very, very, very much detail on custom fields on our YouTube channel. So if you're interested in more on that, check that out. This case field mapping here, if you had a custom case field set up, you could actually have this field's data mapped to that field. Otherwise, it's just going to create a separate field for you. So I'm just going to leave that blank for now. And then in the description, this is where you want to be descriptive because it's going to show up as kind of like the tooltip for the person submitting the form. So I'm just going to put, have you attached your search warrant? And click create. Okay. There's one more setting we need to check before we go take a look at the Relay side. So if we go into the Relay settings here and then click on the custom field options. So here we can see both of the custom fields that I have set up, but I want to make sure that they're enabled because if they're not enabled, they're not going to show up on my intake form. So let me enable both of these. And then let's go see what that did on the Relay side. I'm going to refresh this just to make sure it picked up my new settings. And I'll just generate a random descriptor for this case. That is a very fun one. Okay, so now here in my request details, you'll see the case reference number. So let me just put in some stuff here. And then we also have case type. You'll notice these are the same case types that we set up on the Monolith side in part one of this particular Monolith Monday session. So that's kind of the reasoning for setting all this up ahead of time. So everything, all the data is being tracked the way you want it to be tracked at the onset. So let's say this is a consultation. And here we have you attach your search warrant? I'm actually about to do that in the next step. So I'm going to go ahead and click yes. So inquiry fields will show up in this section on the Relay side. I'm just going to add a description so we can take a look at evidence items as well. Keeping an eye on time here. Okay, so now we can attach our search warrant. All right, cool. And let's say they also have a phone that they're going to submit to us. Notice the fields here. Once I start filling in this information, as soon as I select smartphone, you'll notice it has populated my custom evidence field for PIN passcode. So again, setting up the custom fields and turning them on in the Relay settings will make them appear on this intake form. And that way, It just gives you a little more control over what information you're getting upfront, so you don't necessarily have to go back and forth with the people you're doing work with to get all the information you need to start doing work on your case. Okay, that is actually all that I have for you today. So I'll go ahead and open it up for questions. Let me stop my share here. Whew, a little bit like drinking from the fire hose, but that is okay. Does anybody have any questions? Feel free to drop them in the chat or the Q&A box. Or if you're feeling very social, feel free to raise your hand and you can ask over microphone as well. All right. Looks like that's it for questions. Thank you guys so much for coming today. Really appreciate you spending some time with us. And we'll be back next week, same time, same place, with another Monolith Monday. So hope to see you there. Take care.